أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Muhammad Momin Imran from Seattle, Washington, and I will be your moderator today. Welcome back to our Journey Through the Quran series as we continue learning from Surah Al-Anbiya. In our previous session, we covered ayahs 76 to 88. Today, we will dive into ayahs 88 to 112, wrapping up our journey into the surah after having discovered powerful lessons from the lives of the prophets. Before we set off on today's quest, let me tell you about some super cool programs we offer, because the fun never stops at MCNA-YMj. Okay. 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 We offer prime time for firstly, we offer prime time for kids. It is a free monthly program where we talk about fun and important topics like entrepreneurship, boredom, and time management. Sometimes we even have prime time for parents too. MCNA also offers youth courses during the spring and fall. Our last program was Journey Around the Globe, in which we explored different Muslim countries around the world. Thirdly, we offer YMJ Book Club in the spring and fall. If you love reading and are 11 to 13 years old, this is a place for you. Join us as we explore amazing books together. Please contact your local chapter for more details. We have a children's magazine named Companion. It is a nationwide magazine for kids written by kids. If you love writing, drawing, or sharing ideas, no need to look further. We eagerly look for and accept new contributions from our young artists and authors. Email us at mcna@icna.org or contact your local MCNA-YMJ chapter to know our next theme and send your work to companion@icna.org for a chance to be featured in our next issue. We want to hear from you. Have feedback or ideas for other events? Email us at mcna@icna.org or contact your local MCNA-YMJ chapter. MCNA-YMJ has many local chapters across the United States. For more information, visit our website and click the chapter locator at www.mcnaymj.org. Stay connected and subscribe to our MCNA-YMJ YouTube channel to watch past programs and never miss a new upload. Here you can see QR codes on the screen. Please scan them to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram for updates on future events. Okay. Are you able to scan the QR codes? If you can take a screenshot of the QR codes if that's easier to scan. Okay, I hope you all got the QR codes, and we will start today's program with Tilawa of the Quran. I will do Surah Al-Qadr, talking about the night of power, which is especially important because we are reaching the conclusion of the month of Ramadan, and in 2 days it will be the last 10 days of Ramadan. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أنزلناه في ليلة القدر وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر ليلة القدر خير من ألف شهر تنزل الملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر. Okay. Now before we dive into Surah Al-Anbiya, let us listen to some quick but deep nutritional advice related to Ramadan from Sister Dua Al-Dasuqi. Dua Al-Dasuqi is a registered dietitian nutritionist. She is also a graduate of Qalam Institute's seminary program and a current Alamiya student. You can find out more about her at amuslimdietitian.com. Okay. There we go.
I am back again and really excited to be with y'all for the last time. I am Um, Super grateful to this opportunity, and I'm going to jump right into it. So, Dua Dasuqi, Muslim dietitian, and we are talking about eat to worship. How can we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in how we eat? How can we actually eat in a way that allows us to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And we talked about, thinking about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us when it comes to eating in Jannah and eating in this life. We talked about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us not to be excessive and what excessive can look like. And then we talked about that hungerfulness scale. And so today we're going to wrap it all up and we're going to talk about how the Prophet, peace and blessings, alayhi salatu wasalam, would eat in a way that embodied mindfulness. It embodied this idea of checking in with your body. It embodied valuing food when it was available as a nourishing source, not necessarily to the extent, to the excess that we take when it comes to food becoming a central aspect of our life. And so, when it comes to how the Prophet ﷺ ate, there's a few things that we know, like the way he sat when he ate. We know that he often ate on the floor, despite the fact that there may have been that there were tables at that time, but it was still very common for people to eat on the floor. And the Prophet ﷺ actually chose to eat on the floor more than once. And then we know that the Prophet ﷺ would eat with his right hand. And we know that he would use fingers. He would use his hands, right? Utensils were also available at that time, but there are, and there may be a few narrations where the Prophet ﷺ may have used them, but we know for the vast majority of the time he chose to eat with his hands. And I want to talk about why this can help us be more present. And not every food can be eaten with our hands. And obviously, depending on your cultural background, some foods might feel like you absolutely cannot eat them with your hand, while in another culture you can. So, Arab, Asian subcontinent, my husband's Pakistani, and eating a lot of foods with our hands is very normal, right? Rice, bread, all of these things are used to eat with our hands. Whereas for, a lot of general American culture, eating with your hands for rice, for example, is something that throws people off, but they do use their hands to eat. We still in America use our hands to eat fries. We use our hands to eat burgers. We use our hands to eat pizza. And so there is still a lot of food that's eaten with hands. And when it comes to really checking in with yourself, increasing the sensory experience can really help you connect to your body and connect to this hunger fullness that is going on. And so one thing that is recommended when you're kind of exploring this idea of mindfulness and presence when it comes to food is increasing the senses. So obviously when we eat, we usually do use our mouth. I mean, we have to use our mouth. Excuse me. And so we're using our tongue and our sense of taste. But a lot of times we're also eating super fast that we don't have an opportunity for our taste buds to fully grasp what we're eating. And you might have eaten like, a piece of cake or a sandwich, and someone asks you afterwards, "Oh, how was it?" And you're like, "Oh, it was good." And then they'll be like, "Okay, was it too salty?" And you don't even know because you just ate in a way that was so fast, not connected with your body, that you really weren't able to register that. And so slowing down while we're eating, using our senses as much as possible. So obviously slowing down in the mouth, taking more time to chew our food, smelling the food before we eat it, looking at our food. So how many times are we either on a screen, so we're not looking at our food, or maybe even so deep in conversation with other people that we're not looking at our food. And we don't even realize when our food is gone. We don't even realize how much was on our plate, for example. Listening, hearing is something that might be a little strange, but think of like when you're chewing your food, does it sound crunchy, right? Does it make noise? That thing. And then the sensory experience, touching our food. So obviously as Muslims, sorry, not as Muslims, as people that, if you're eating with your hands, then a lot of times you're already kind of connecting to this sense of the sense of touching our food a little bit more. So keeping that in your mind. Other things that we learned from the Prophet ﷺ is when he used to always sit down to eat. And so this helps us slow down. When we are eating while we're walking or on the go, we're obviously going to be more distracted. But when we are making sure that we sit down, we're a little bit more connected to our food. The Prophet ﷺ would always make dua. before eating his food. And so this sense of gratitude, recognition of where the food is from, simple du'as that you might be familiar with. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. If you forget at the beginning of the meal and you want to still say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, the Prophet ﷺ taught us to say Bismillahi awwalihi wa akhirihi, Bismillah at the beginning and at the end. And then there's also du'as that you can add to that, like Allahumma barik lana fih wa at'imna khayran min. Oh Allah, bless us in it and provide us with better than it. Another thing that can help us really connect with our food is this prophetic example of not saying anything bad about our food. The Prophet ﷺ did not ever say anything negative. He never insulted food. Qat. Qat means like ever, ever, ever. If he liked it, he ate it. And if he didn't, he left it. Another thing is eating with others as a source of barakah. So whether you're at home with your family or outside, connecting with others while we eat is something that can really bring barakah to our food. It allows us to just be more connected in general as a community. And then the last one is remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again at the end. So making dua after we eat and remembering that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the source of this food and remembering that we want to eat in a way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with. We want to eat in a way that supports our worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so there's a couple different duas, but one that you can use is Alhamdulillah alladhi at'amani hadha wa razaqni min ghayri hawlin minni wa la quwwa, which is praise be to Allah who has given me this food and sustained me with it, though I was powerless to do so myself, which basically is really important for us to remember that if it was not for our Creator and all of the blessings that He has given us, we would not even be able to eat the food that we are given. And so I hope this kind of expands your view of food. And it might not be what you expected when you were like, oh, you're going to hear from a registered dietitian, but I do hope that it helps you see food in a different light. I hope it helps you focus on how you eat. And you'll find that although what you eat is important, if you can really understand how to eat in a manner that supports our bodies, in a manner that supports our worship, then you will find that the what to eat comes a little bit more easily. Once again, Jazakumullah khair for having me. I am really grateful to this opportunity, and hopefully I can speak to you all at some other time. Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah khair for the great nutritional advice, Sister Dua Al-Saduqi. And now let me introduce you to today's guest speaker, Aisha Qayyum. She is a mother of two precious girls and holds a BA in Tafsir from IIUI, Islamabad. She has been a teacher for 13 years, including the Islamic School of Irving. She also volunteers to lead book discussions for MCNA-YMj Book Club, and she currently works in IT.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Jazakumullah khair for that introduction. All right, so welcome back, everyone. This is our last session for Surah Al-Anbiya, and I hope that you have all really, really enjoyed it and have learned a lot. So these last ayat of the surah are going to be verses 89 to 112. And we're going to begin with the very next slide, in which it is mentioned the last of the prophets in the surah. So if you could please go ahead to the next slide. All right, so verses 89 to 91. So these verses talk about Prophet Zakaria alayhi salam, his wife, and also Maryam alayhi salam. And Zakaria alayhi salam's son as well, Yahya alayhi salam. So once again, sorry, the names are the biblical names, but I'll let you know that Zechariah sounds like Zakaria, so that's easy. And then John the Baptist is actually how Yahya alayhi salam is mentioned in the Bible. So this is beginning with the story of Zakaria alayhi salam, and Zakaria alayhi salam is very old, right? And so he makes dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Allah, don't leave me alone, like by myself. And indeed, you're the best of heirs, but what he's trying to say is, please give me an heir. And by heir, he doesn't just mean somebody who is going to inherit my worldly possessions, right? So when he's asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for an heir, for somebody to inherit him, he's asking for somebody who will continue his mission, somebody who will inherit his mission of being a prophet to the children of Israel, to the believers at that time. So he says, Ya Allah, don't leave me alone. Yani, don't let me be the last prophet. Send me somebody who will continue my job and will continue to call people towards you and continue to call people to stay steadfast in their belief and prepare for the akhirah. So that's what his dua is. So let me go back a little bit. So the ayah actually starts with the dua of Zakaria alayhi salam, but elsewhere in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that Zakaria alayhi salam, he's very old at the time that he makes this dua, right? So by this point, he pretty much he doesn't really think that it's possible for him and his wife to have a child. But what is it that inspires him, that despite of his old age, in spite of his old age, he thinks, okay, let me make a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we maybe Allah will bless us with a child, even though we're really, really old. So what happens is that he had a niece who we all know his niece was Maryam alayhi salam, the mother of Isa alayhi salam. So what had happened was that Maryam alayhi salam's mom also was having a lot of difficulty having a child. And so she made dua to Allah. She said, Ya Allah, if you give me a child, I promise that I will dedicate my child to the temple. So at this time, the believers were the children of Israel or the Jews. And so the place where they would go for worship was the temple. And so a practice that they had was that whenever somebody wanted to dedicate themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and become really close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and serve the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they would dedicate themselves to the temple. And so they would stay in the temple and they would worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just spend all of their time just really in just religious activities. And so that's what she said. She said, if you bless me with a child, I will dedicate my child to the temple, in your service. And now in those days, the only people who stayed in the temple and served Allah in that manner were boys, right? So she's basically saying, Ya Allah, give me a son, and if I have a son, then I promise that he will be serving you in the temple. But of course, as we know, she actually, when she gives birth, it's a girl, and she's surprised and also a little disappointed because she's like, okay, well, it's a girl, it's not a boy. However, she decides that, even though it's a girl and even though it's unusual, she's still going to go ahead and dedicate Maryam alayhi salam to the temple. And one thing that I really, really love, that I often remember, and actually my own daughter is named Maryam, is that when Maryam alayhi salam is born, her mom makes a very special dua that I absolutely love. It's in Surah Al-Imran. And so she says, Allah, I ask you to protect her, meaning the daughter that she's holding in her hands, Maryam alayhi salam. I ask you to protect her and her children that she's going to have in the future from Shaitan the rejected. So this is the dua that she makes. And it's always really, really been amazing to me to think that, here she is, she's holding a baby, right? And you guys are really little, but like, I'm sure if you ask your parents, right? Like when they first held you, what is it that they were thinking? So I know that when I held my daughter, right, at that time, I was just thinking about her. But, and generally that's what happens, right? Like you're just thinking about that baby that's in your arms. But Maryam alayhi salam's mom not only was thinking about her, but she was also thinking about her future kids, right? And her future. So she said, Ya Allah, protect this baby, but also all the children that are going to come after her. So for example, it's like saying, Ya Allah, protect my child and also any future generations that are going to come. So this was a really beautiful dua. So this is the dua that she makes. And of course, we know that the only child that Maryam alayhi salam has is Isa alayhi salam. And of course, we know that he had that special place with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala completely protected him from any sort of wrongdoings and made him into a prophet. So anyway, so Maryam alayhi salam is born. And she gets dedicated to the temple. Now, because she's a girl and because she's getting dedicated to the temple, she needed somebody to kind of be like her guardian, right? And so her father couldn't be her guardian because her father had actually passed away before she was born. So so she needed a guardian, and so what happened is that everybody was like, let me be her guardian, let me be her guardian, let me be her guardian, right? And so the person who actually gets the job is Zakaria alayhi salam, right? So he's the one who becomes her guardian. So Zakaria alayhi salam actually is related to Maryam alayhi salam in the sense that he is her uncle, right? So Zakaria alayhi salam's wife is actually the sister of Maryam alayhi salam's mom. So both of them are sisters. And so Zakaria alayhi salam is her uncle because he's married to her aunt. So so he becomes her guardian, and he's very, very old, right? And Maryam alayhi salam is, like, you can imagine, like maybe a young teenager, right? And so she's in the temple and she's worshiping, and from the very beginning, right, there were special miracles that showed that she was somebody very special, somebody that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had chose for special blessing, right? And so one of those things was that food would miraculously appear for her in her chambers, right? So there would be like this inner place in the temple where nobody else was allowed to come. So she was there, she was completely private, she was just, there worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and doing other things. So she was by herself, and the only person who would actually come to see her was Zakaria alayhi salam, right? in that special place where that was just her own chamber. Over there, the only person who was allowed to come to meet her over there was Zakaria alayhi salam. So Zakaria alayhi salam, when he would come and visit her, sometimes he would find that there was food, that had just miraculously come there. And he's like, how did you get this? Where did this come from? Because not only was the food there that he hadn't brought for her, but it was also like unusual, like in the sense that if it was winter time, the food that she would have would be like fruits that are found only in the summer, or vice versa. Like if it was summer, she would have things that normally you would only have in the winter time. And maybe you guys don't really understand what that means, because now you go to the supermarket, you can get anything that you want at any time, right? But back then, it's like, you were really dependent upon the seasons in order to in terms of what kind of food was available to you. So anyway, so he saw this, right? And he was like, how is it that you have this? Where did this come from? And so Maryam alayhi salam responds to him and says, this is from Allah, and Allah can provide whatever he wishes to whomever he wishes, right? And so when Zakaria alayhi salam sees this, right, and he sees that, she has this special blessing, and then he thinks back that, her mom was also not able to have her, and because again, her parents were also quite old when she was born. So then he's like, what? Here is a miracle right in front of my eyes, right? That Maryam alayhi salam is a miracle, right? Why don't I make dua to Allah, and then Allah will bless me with a miracle, me and my wife with a miracle too. So this is what he's thinking. And so at that time, when he sees this miracle in Maryam alayhi salam, he says, Ya Allah, send me a miracle as well. Send me someone who will inherit my job and will be a prophet after me. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, accepts this dua, and they are blessed with a son. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who chooses his name and says his name will be Yahya. And this is the unique name that nobody before him ever had. Okay, so this is the story in a nutshell of Maryam alayhi salam and her family. Now, the interesting thing, the really, really special thing about this story, I put like 4 words on the bottom of the slide so that we have something to focus on, is that, all of them, they had hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So especially Zakaria alayhi salam, right? He had hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that even though, this whole time, they were married, but they had no kids. Even then, he didn't lose hope. And so one thing that I really want us to reflect upon is how quickly sometimes we lose hope, right? You're like, oh my God, I've been making dua to Allah for like months, right? And it still hasn't happened yet. And sometimes not even months. Sometimes it's just been a few days, and we're like, oh, it's been days. I've been making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's still not happening. What am I going to do, right? But we see that the example that is set for us by Zakaria alayhi salam in just these few ayat, but in other places, of course, there are many, many examples of this, right? It's that we do not lose hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though we have been making that dua maybe for many, many, many years, right? We make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though to our minds, it might seem like it's not it's not going to happen, right? Like maybe when we look at it, we're like, oh, this is not going to happen, right? But we still have hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we have trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That even though from my limited understanding, I feel like this is something that's not going to happen, but I have hope and I have trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I have belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power that if this is the right thing and this is the right time, even though to me it seems like, okay, well, for so long it didn't happen, it's probably not going to happen right now, but still having that hope and trust and belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I make that dua anyway, right? Knowing that if it's meant to be, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can make it happen. Right. So those are two things that I feel like we learn from this. Another thing that we learn is patience, because of course, you have to be patient in order to continue making dua, right? If you don't have patience, maybe you'll make dua for like a couple of days and then you'll be like, oh, forget it, this is not working, right? But if you have patience and you continue to trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then there's actually like a really like amazing transformative experience that you go through. Like it's like a transformation that happens inside of your heart, right? That actually builds that trust in him, like because you were patient and you continue to make dua, it builds that trust inside your heart for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So definitely if you stick with making dua and you're consistent in it and you don't give up, you'll notice that something happens inside your heart, a transformation. But you won't experience it unless you actually try it. So inshallah, may Allah make us all be patient and consistent in making dua to him. Okay, and then finally, the last thing is submission to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does that mean? That means that a lot of times things happen and we're like, why did this happen? Oh Allah, why me? Why did this happen to me? Right? So that means that we're not submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. That means that we are fighting against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained for us. And the right way to show that we're submitting to Allah's will is to say, Ya Allah, how can I learn from this? How can I, in this situation that I'm in, how can I come closer to you? How can I be the best worshiper to you in this situation, right? So that is showing submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's not easy. It's definitely not easy. That's where the test is for us to see, whether we're strong believers or whether we're weak believers, right? So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let us develop more and more submission, more and more patience and hope and trust in him, so that we do come out of any sort of trials or tests in our life as strong believers. Ameen. All right, so let's go ahead to the next slide. All right. So after talking about so many different prophets, right? And you guys, I forgot to mention that at the end of our class over here, we are going to have a blue kit game. So definitely pay attention. And I'm also going to keep an eye on the comments. So I'm going to ask you questions, and I would love for you to participate and answer my questions. So here's your very first question for today. Surah Al-Anbiya talks about a lot of prophets. Do you guys know how many prophets? And if you don't know the exact number, that's fine. Go ahead and write down the name of one of the prophets or more that you remember learning about in this surah. Okay, so in Surah Al-Anbiya, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about a lot of prophets. And for each of them, he gives us just a tiny little excerpt, a tiny little blurb about something that happened in their lives, right? So maybe just 1 or 2 or 3 ayat about each prophet, and each of those little selections about the prophets are meant to teach us something really, really important, right? So, and then Zakaria alayhi salam is the last one who is mentioned over here, right? And so at the end of this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, okay, so here is the lesson that I want you to gain from all of these different stories that you've been listening to. So the lesson is that our community is one community. And the word community over here is a translation of the word ummah, right? And I'm sure all of you have heard the word ummah before, right? What do you think the word ummah means? All right, does anyone know what the word ummah means? Right, so well, ummah right here, it means community, right? It means a group of people that are bound together by their faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that you are one community, you are one group, you're one nation, Jazakallah khair, right? So all of you, your purpose, the thing that unites you is that I am your Lord, and so worship me. And so you'll see like the graphic that I have on the bottom is that, all the hands are, holding each other, and in the center is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is really the point, right? I don't know how many of you have maybe traveled abroad to a different country, maybe a place where you didn't speak the language. And then like the first thing that I do is I always look for a masjid nearby, right? And one of the most beautiful things is when you go to a masjid and you might not speak the same language, and maybe you don't even have to travel abroad, right? Maybe just even here in the US, sometimes there are small masajid that are catering to a particular ethnic community, right? And you might go into that masjid, right? And maybe you don't speak the language that most of the people over there speak, but there is still that sense of unity in purpose, right? Like when the iqama is called and everybody lines up for salah, right? It doesn't matter whether you speak the same language or not, in terms of like the words that you're speaking, right? But the language that kind of unites us is the language of Islam, right? It's the language of the Quran. It's the language of salah, right? Like we're still united. We're united in our worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So this is what Allah is saying, that yes, Allah sent a lot of prophets and messengers throughout time, but all of us, we are one, right? So this is what is really important, really, really essential for us to remember. And actually, I don't know if you guys are old enough, but I would say definitely a great book for you to read is the autobiography of Malcolm X. Like there are some things in it that are a little bit mature content because he talks about his journey from when he wasn't a Muslim and he was doing a lot of bad things, and then he went to jail, and then in jail he learned about Islam, and then he became a Muslim. But he became Muslim in like it wasn't like correct Islam. He started following like this strange, weird religion that called itself Islam. But what happened was that because he thought he had become Muslim, he started to learn a little bit more about Islam, and then he came to the correct understanding of Islam. So his entire journey is really amazing. And towards the end of his life, he actually goes on Hajj. And one of the most amazing parts of that book is really his experience of when he went on Hajj. And actually, Malcolm X, I don't know how many of you know about him, but you should definitely learn more about him. He was a civil rights leader at the same time as Martin Luther King, right? But because he was Muslim and because he said a lot of things that people thought were that were a bit radical, right? They don't teach us about him in school, right? As much. Maybe they'll mention him at most, right? I don't know how many of you have heard of him, Malcolm X, but definitely we as Muslims should know about him because he was one of us, right? So anyway, so he went on Hajj, and his whole life he had been fighting for equality between Black people and white people in the United States, right? And so remember, so that is like, that's like the main experience that he has had in his life is that he has been discriminated against for being a Black man, right? And as we know in Islam, right, there is no superiority of a Black person over a white person, or a white person over a Black person, or an Arab person over a non-Arab, or vice versa, right? The Prophet ﷺ made this very clear in the last khutbah that he gave to the believers, right? He said, all of you are equal, right? And the only way somebody can be better than another person is if they're a better Muslim, right? And even that is something that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, because nobody else can know what's inside our hearts, right? No person can know what's inside our hearts. Only Allah knows what's inside our hearts. So only Allah truly knows who is better than somebody else, right? But skin color is definitely not something that makes somebody better than anyone else. So Malcolm X, his whole life, he's been trying to say the same thing, that, even though we have different skin color, we are still the same people. We're still humans, and you shouldn't treat us badly, so on and so forth, right? So he's been saying this his whole life. And so finally, and like he's been through this really long and difficult journey where, at first he had no guidance, then he became like a Muslim, but like in a weird in a weird like cult that wasn't really Islam. And then finally he found out that, okay, there is a real Islam, and I need to become a real Muslim. And then he becomes a real Muslim, and then he goes on Hajj, right? And when he's on Hajj and he sees that, you know, all people are equal and everybody is sharing with one another and everybody's giving respect to one another and everybody is just there to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and nobody cares what you look like, right? Then he says something really amazing. He says, you know, it was at this moment when I was at Hajj and I saw that there's like a sea of people, right? And they're people from all over the world, right? People whose skin color is like the whitest of the white, and people who are so dark also, and everybody in between. And everybody is just together doing the tawaf around the Kaaba, and everybody is just thinking about, you know, their connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their relationship with their Lord, right? He's like, at that moment I realized that the only way humanity could be united is if they believe in one God. Because when they believe in one God, that is when they realize that they don't hate one another, because they're all created by that same God. The same God that created white people is the same God that created black people, the same God that created Arabs, and the same God that created non-Arabs, right? And so all of us, because we're created by the same God, we are all equal. So he's like, you know, this was the big light bulb moment for him, right? He was like, Islam is the answer. Islam is the answer to solve the racial prejudice that exists in the United States. So anyway, so I'm sorry, I went off on a bit of a tangent, but I would say definitely read up in on Malcolm X, right? This verse, this community of yours is one community, and I'm your Lord, to worship me. This is exactly what he thought of when he went on Hajj. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he warns us, he says, make sure that you don't divide yourself into different groups, right? And remember that one day you are all going to return to me. You know, all of you are going to return to me. And at that time, the only thing that's going to matter, what's going to matter? Ayah 94, only whether or not you did good deeds or whether you wasted your time and didn't do good deeds, right? And everything that you do is being written down, right? So this is the main thing. Okay, next slide. All right. So in the next few ayat, it's a really long selection of ayat. So what I did was I just put like the main points. I didn't put the actual translation. So in these ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is continuing in warning the disbelievers, right? So Surah Al-Anbiya, like the way it's flowing is that Allah starts by giving us a lot of stories of different different prophets, and then he says, all of you are united, you're all the same ummah, you know, make sure you worship me, make sure you do good deeds, right? Because one day this life is going to end and you're all going to return to me. So now in ayahs 95 to 104, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is continuing his warning to this disbelievers, and he's saying that if you don't worship me and you worship false gods instead, then there's a really, really awful and horrible punishment in hellfire. So not only will the people who are worshiping false gods be in the hellfire, but to really, really emphasize that false gods don't deserve to be worshipped because they don't have any power, because they're nothing, right? Is that Allah says that even the false gods are going to be burning in hell, right? So like if they had any power, right, or if, like, you know, they were God, how could they be in hell, right? So this is to make it really, really, really clear to the disbelievers, is that don't worship false gods. Worship only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the only true God. And when you worship Allah, you will all be united with all the believers that live in the world, not only right now, but also any believers that lived in the past, right? So this is something that's really amazing that I like to really think about a lot, is that when I practice my faith and I say the shahada and I believe, you know, in my heart that, you know, I'm a Muslim and Allah is my God, and or Allah is God, right? Like I believe this deeply in my heart. I think, okay, you know what? This was the same faith. This was the same belief that the Sahaba of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had. Right? And that makes me feel so amazing to think that, okay, these people who met the Prophet ﷺ, they lived with him, they had that same love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they had that same love for the Quran. And like all throughout the generations between them and me, people in the same way, they love the Quran, they love the Prophet, they love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so all of that gets passed down from generation to generation to generation to generation until it reaches us. And all of us are united, right, in that love for Allah and the love for Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the love for the Quran, the love for Islam, right? So this is something that's really amazing and really wonderful to think about. So so believing in false gods leads to everybody believing in different things. Some person believes in this God, some person believes in that God, and everybody's fighting. They're like, my God is better, no, my God is better. It becomes like a joke, right? It really becomes like a joke. So believing in false gods is not good, and believing in one God is the correct way to live. Now you might notice that I skipped over the first bullet point, which is Ya'juj and Ma'juj. I don't know if you guys have heard of Ya'juj and Ma'juj. If you know anything about Ya'juj and Ma'juj, go ahead and put it in the comments. I'm definitely reading them. So Ya'juj and Ma'juj are a group of people. And does anyone know which surah in the Quran Ya'juj and Ma'juj are mentioned in? So they're mentioned in a few different places. I guess let me be a little bit more specific. So they're actually mentioned in Surah Al-Kahf, right? And in Surah Al-Kahf, we find a story of how there was a leader by the name of Dhul Qarnayn, right? And he was a really great leader, as described in the Surah Al-Kahf, right? And he traveled like far and wide from east to west, and he was conquering lands, and just he was described as a very just and really wonderful leader, right? So what happens is that in his travels he comes upon a people, right, who say, oh, can you please help us? We see that you're a wonderful, really great leader. And so there are these people called Ya'juj and Ma'juj, and they're really, really hurting us. They come and they attack us and so on and so forth. So can you please build a barrier so that these people cannot come and bother us anymore? And so that's what Dhul Qarnayn does. He builds a wall, right? And the description of that wall is in Surah Al-Kahf. I encourage all of you to read the translation of Surah Al-Kahf and learn more about it. This is towards the end of Surah Al-Kahf. And Surah Al-Kahf is really, really long. It's like a little bit more than the length of a juz. So if you're looking specifically for the surah, it's towards the end of the surah. For this story, it's towards the end of the surah. So anyway, so he builds a wall. It's a very strong wall. And he says that this wall will stay until the day of judgment or until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills, right? So that wall was built, and Ya'juj and Ma'juj were behind that wall, and they were not able to come out from that wall. And there are a lot of ahadith as well that talk about this wall and about Ya'juj and Ma'juj. But the main thing is that Ya'juj and Ma'juj will continue to try to come out of the wall, but they will not be able to until the day of judgment is very, very close. Right. So what I'd like us to think about, just reflecting on these ayat, just basically two questions. First of all, how can we prepare for the day of judgment, right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is warning the disbelievers about the day of judgment. But it's kind of like, when one kid does something bad in class, right, and the teacher yells at that kid, then the smart kids are the ones who are like, okay, that kid is getting yelled at, let me straighten myself up, so that I'm not the next person to get yelled at. So whenever in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is warning the disbelievers, right? Even though we're not disbelievers, we believe, but even then we should listen to what Allah is warning about to make sure that we are definitely safe from that thing, right? So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying there's a horrible punishment in the hereafter for people who disbelieve, right? Even though we're believers, we should say, oh, what are the things that I need to do? How can I prepare so that I am safe, really, really safe from the punishment of the hellfire, right? So that's a really important question, is how can we prepare for the day of judgment, right? Like, what are some good deeds that we can do? What are some bad habits or bad deeds that we should stop doing? Right. So this is a good question. And for everybody, the answer is going to be different, right? Maybe I have different bad habits than you that I need to get rid of. Maybe maybe the good deeds that I'm interested in doing are a little bit different from the good deeds that you're interested in doing. Like maybe I'm more interested in giving sadaqah, or maybe you're more interested in doing a lot of extra nafal ibadat, maybe, so on and so forth. So the answer is a little bit different for everybody, right? So everybody should reflect on how can I prepare for the day of judgment. And then also, what are the signs of the Day of Judgment? So this is actually something that my kids and I are doing as well, is that we're learning about the signs of the Day of Judgment. Just we're reading the hadith together and we're discussing them and we're talking about what that means. And we're also talking about what's happening in the world these days, because I don't know how much you guys know, but there are a lot of really crazy things happening right now, right? So definitely those are two really good questions for you to think about and discuss with your family, and just really reflect upon. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, and then over here, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions so there's a warning for the disbelievers, and then there's kind of like a glad tiding, like a good news for the believers. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that it was written in the Psalms. Now, the Psalms are the Zabur, right? So Allah says He has written in the Zabur that the earth will be inherited by my righteous servants. And so what He's trying to say is that, the disbelievers can do bad things, they can attack the believers, they can do a lot of horrible things, but in the end, the victory will be for the believers, right? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that this is a message for those who are worshiping, that, don't lose heart. Like, if you see that bad things are happening to believers, don't think that you've lost. In the end, you will be victorious, right? So this is something that, again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us this, because what are the 4 things that we want to focus on? Hope, trust, patience, and submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah gave us all of those stories of all those different prophets to tell us that, okay, no matter what, you have to stay firm in your belief, just like all those people stayed firm. Right? So that's what Allah is saying, that in the end, the righteous servants, those are the ones who will be victorious, right? And then finally, Allah says to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ayah 107 is addressed directly to Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says, "We did not send you except as mercy to mankind." And the Arabic, the verses from the Quran, the words from the Quran are rahmatal lil alameen. Okay, so rahmah for the alameen, the universe. Okay, so this is the thing that is said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then and so that's basically it. Let's go on to the last slide. And sorry, not yeah, okay. So then finally, these are the last few ayat, and in these ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is once again just kind of summarizing everything that was said in the surah, that Allah is saying, say, like, this is a command that is being given, like, say, it is revealed to me that your God is one God. Are you going to submit? Okay, so this is something that I actually talk to my kids about a lot as well, is that like, there are a lot of crazy things happening in the world these days, and a lot of people are aware of Islam and Muslims, and sometimes they might have some really, really incorrect thoughts about what it means to be a Muslim. Like, they might think that Muslims are terrorists. They might think that Muslims want to bring Sharia law, right? And like, they have crazy ideas about what the Sharia actually is, right? And at that time, it might be a little bit difficult to be like openly Muslim, right? Or to really kind of like say what you believe in, right? And I tell my kids that, it's different for you than it was for me when I was growing up in New York, right? At that time, people didn't know what Islam was. They didn't know what the hijab was. So when they saw me wearing hijab, they're like, why do you always wear that? What is that thing that you have in your head, right? They would ask me questions like, what language do you speak? Or they'd be like, which country are you from? And if I said Pakistan, they would be like, where is that? Like, they had no idea, right? So it's obviously not like that anymore. The world is a much, much, much different place than it was back then. And it was a little bit easier. It was a lot easier when I was growing up, because when people don't know anything, they don't really have a negative opinion about it, right? So you can just tell them the way it is, right? And you can have a really positive sort of encounter with them. But nowadays, you're dealing with people who have like this sort of preset notion of like, okay, this is what Islam is, this is what Muslims are like, right? Based upon what they've heard on the news or on the internet or things like that, right? Despite that, the commandment is still there that we are supposed to tell people that our belief is in one God, and also that we submit to Allah. And you don't have to say exactly, are you going to submit? But you can challenge them on some things. Like if they say things that are crazy, like, a girl can be a boy or a boy can be a girl, you can say something like, but I don't think, you can say something like, we are boys or girls based on the way that we are created, right? And that's not something that we can choose. So that's something that you can say. And it might be really scary to say that, to challenge people, but it is something that is a responsibility because you are living in these times and you're seeing this happen around you. So you can try to say something a little bit, but and then what does Allah tell us in the next ayah? That if you try to tell people what the right thing is and they turn away, then you don't need to worry about it. Then at that point, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and again, you don't have to like literally say it like this exactly, but Allah says, say to them, I have informed you like to the best of my ability, and whether or not you believe is up to you. And of course it's implied that if you don't believe in God, then God will punish you. And then the second part is, and I don't know whether what you are promised, like the punishment that you're promised for disbelief, is near or far. So maybe for a while, if you're disobeying God, you're not going to get punished, and you might think, okay, well, God is not real and the punishment is obviously not real, and I can live my life however I want without following any rules, right? But whether the punishment is near or it's far, the punishment is definitely coming for not believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And so when we talk to people who are saying things that are against Islam, we can very respectfully say what our point of view is, right? I believe that boys are created as boys and they stay boys, and girls are created as girls and they stay girls, right? And this is as clearly as I can tell you of my belief. And if you don't want to believe that, then that's your choice, right? So that might be how you can say it, how you can follow verses 108 and 109, right? Just clearly say, this is what I believe, and it's up to you whether you want to believe that or not. Okay. And so that's basically what these verses are telling us. And then finally, the last verse is, my Lord judged with justice, meaning that in this life, throughout the entire time span that all of these prophets came, right? All of these prophets, they came, they brought the message. Some people believed in the message, other people argued against them, right? There was conflict, there was disagreement, right? And what happens when people have disagreements, right? They go to a judge and they say, okay, here is my point of view. And the other person says, here is my point of view. And then the judge, with justice, tells them who is correct and who is wrong, right? So finally, in the end, the last ayah saying, my Lord judge with justice, and our Lord is the gracious, and whose help we seek against everything, all the false claims that the disbelievers are making. So finally, this surah ends by telling us that no matter how many conflicts, how many disagreements we may have, ultimately it is up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to decide who is correct and who is not correct, right? As for us, we're going to do our best to be as steadfast as possible upon the message that the prophets brought to us, and we're going to do our best to pass that message on in an appropriate way. And I know I didn't really have time to get into all of it, right? But like in an appropriate manner, in the way that is suitable for the situation that you're in, right? After you bring that message, then in the end you say it is up to you whether you want to believe or not, right? As for me, I believe, right? And in the end, I know that we're going to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to tell us, okay, you were correct, you were wrong. And that's it. And that is what the surah is teaching us, and that is what we believe in. All right. So not a lot of comments in the in the chat, but I hope you guys were listening, and I hope you guys learned a lot. So I'm going to So I'm going to actually introduce someone to you before we play our blue kit. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so before we play our blue kit, I wanted to introduce Sister Zohar Qureshi, a peer counselor and a YM alum who holds degrees in family life education and family therapy. And she's going to speak for about 5 minutes about connecting with Ramadan to give you tips for elevating your Ramadan experience. And this is our last segment, and inshallah, don't go away because I'll see you for the blue kit.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and welcome back to another Ramadan connection. Inshallah, today we're going to be talking about reflecting and growth. But before we do, رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Okay, reflection and growing is something that is so close to my heart, and it's something that as a therapist I tell lots and lots of people to do all the time, and as someone who is trying her best to be the best Muslim she can be, it's something I try to focus on a lot as well. So in Islam, reflection is incredibly important. We see stories of prophets taking the time to be alone, right? And when you are alone and you have nothing else around you, the thing that you do is you reflect. And I have grow there because we all want to be better people. We all want to be better than we were yesterday, which is, again, Islamic concept. But in order to grow and be better, you have to reflect on yourself and you have to reflect on your behavior. Now, reflection means taking the time to think about yourself. If you get angry in certain situations, if you're happy in certain situations, if you're sad in situations, reflecting on that means thinking, why do I do that? What are behaviors that I have? What are things that I do? What are things I struggle with? What are things that I'm good at? And the only time those happen are when you take time for yourself without any distractions, right? So in Ramadan, what this can look like is taking 10 to 15 minutes of your day, sitting by yourself. You can set a vibe, guys. Like, set a vibe, have like the lights dimmed, like in a quiet room, have a little cozy corner, whatever you need to. But just sit there and be alone with your thoughts, but very intentionally think about yourself and maybe choose a topic. Maybe one day you think, okay, what are things that I really struggle with as a Muslim? Like, am I struggling with prayers? Is fasting really hard for me? What are things that are hard for me as a Muslim? And then maybe another day you think about, what are things that are really easy for me as a Muslim? And it's important to know these things because if you know what's hard for you, you know where you need to improve. And if you know what you're good at or what things you don't struggle with, then you're able to plan your day or your month and say, okay, I am having a difficult day today, emotionally, physically, whatever. So I'm going to stick with deeds that fall into things that are easy for me. And also it helps you with your dua, because if you have certain flaws, you can ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help you in those things, right? And if you have certain things that you're good at, you say, oh Allah, please accept those things from me. And also it's important for us to know ourselves so that we can do things that please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and avoid things that don't. Now, I'll give an example for myself to help make this kind of concrete. So I love to read. I absolutely adore reading. Love reading. Mainly fiction. Give me a nonfiction book and I will cry tears of boredom. But I love a fiction book. But something I know about myself is that if I'm reading a book and it's a really good book, I will not put it down. And I will avoid all responsibility and all of the things that I need to do. And I might do the bare minimum of like praying my prayers and like making sure my kids are fed, but I'm not going to do anything else until I know what happens in the book. So because of that, I limit myself to reading when I'm going on long road trips or airplane rides when there's really nothing else I can be doing. Or I reread old books to unwind at night. so that I know I don't have to finish the whole book because I already know what happens, so it's going to be okay. And I know these things about myself because I have taken the time to sit down and think, okay, this is something that I do. Why do I do this? What are things I can do to change it so I'm not doing things that are displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the goal from this is I want everybody to take some time, sit by themselves and think about yourself and the things that you do. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us all reflect in the best way and grow in a way that pleases Him. May He accept every single one of our good deeds and every single moment of reflection that we have for Him and every effort that we put for Him. May He forgive us for all the things that we do wrong. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah in everybody's time, especially for you guys for attending these classes. It's such a wonderful thing. Assalamu alaikum, guys. Jazakallah khair.
All right, everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you can see the Blue Kit code. Let's see. Share screen. Okay, here we are. Okay, so last time we
Sister Aisha, there might be a problem with the connection. There might be a problem with the connection. We can't hear you. We can't hear you, and we can't see your screen.
Oh, Sonika, I'm so sorry about that. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can. Are you
Okay, I'm
sharing?
so sorry about that. Yeah, I was actually. Oh, I see what it is. I think every time I navigate away, it just automatically mutes me. Okay, so so you guys, basically, I'm just gonna share my screen. I guess I won't be speaking. And so you'll see a link on the upper left corner of the screen that that you need to navigate to, and then you'll see a game ID. It'll be really big, and so that's what you need to enter in order to join the Blue Kit. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Okay, I think that worked. Okay, so now we can see the shared screen, and I can also talk to you. Okay, good. Perfect. All right, we'll wait just another 10 seconds. Okay, maybe we'll wait just a little bit longer in case anyone's joining. All right, looks like everyone's here. Let me go ahead and start the game. And I just wanted to say for anyone who's online, and if you didn't get a chance to join the game, you can still join it. If you look in the upper right corner of the screen, you'll see the game ID is still displayed. So if you enter that game ID, you'll still be able to join in the game. All right, we're about halfway done with the game, a little more, and Omnia is in the lead with Muhammad in second place and Amna in third place. But things are changing very quickly. All right, we've got less than a minute. The competition is really tough. Let's see what happens. All right, 30 seconds. All right, let's see. Amnia in third place, Simran second, and Amna in first place. Congratulations. Awesome job, you guys. And wonderful job to all of you. I know that Gold Rush can be a little bit tricky because sometimes you could be in the lead and then in the very last second somebody can swap with you. But good job anyway. And mashallah, I'm really proud of you. I hope you guys learned a lot. I hope you enjoyed. And inshallah, have a wonderful last 10 days of Ramadan. Remember me in your du'as. I'll remember you guys as well. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from us all the good deeds that we do, all the worship that we do, all the fasting that we're doing. Ameen.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Aisha, for giving us that deep and informational talk. You made it very. You took the ayahs of the Quran and made them relevant to us nowadays, and I found that really interesting. Okay, before we go, just two quick reminders. If you missed and would like to watch any of our previous sessions or series, you can find the recordings on MCNA's Facebook and YouTube channels. And next month we will resume these sessions. So stay tuned and stay connected. Now, to end, I will recite Surah Al-Asr, and I will recite a dua. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Okay, now for the dua. Bismillah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.